We now have our next speaker, and we have Father Francis Gonsalves. He is a Jesuit, and he will be speaking on the topic called to restore order from global disorder. Um, Professor Francis Gonsalves has a licentiate from the Gregorian University, Rome, and a PhD from the University of Madras. He has been a professor and principal at Vidyajyoti College of Theology, Delhi, and has taught theology at Sogang University, Seoul, South Korea, and at the Jesuit School of Theology, Berkeley, affiliated to Santa Clara University, USA. He also served as the Executive Secretary of the Indian Theological Association. Currently, he is the president of Nanadeepa Institute of Philosophy and Theology, Pune, as well as the Executive Secretary of the Commission for Theology and Doctrine of the CCBI. He has authored 7 books, edited 8 others, and published over 200 scholarly articles in various publications in India and abroad. So we welcome your father, and over to you.
Thank you, friends. Can you see my screen?
No, Father.
Yes, we can see you. If you have shared the screen, not yet.
Just a minute. Can you see the screen now?
Yes, yes, yes.
No, Father Francis, can't see.
You can't see.
We are
No.
able to see, but we can see the Google Meet screen itself. I think you have shared the entire screen. Do you want me to share it, Father?
If I can see it, I'll be able to. Yeah. Did you share my screen now?
Yes, yes, Father. Just a moment. I will share the presentation.
Okay, now?
Yes, Francis.
You can see my screen now.
Yes, yes, Father.
Okay, so let me begin, friends. I'm very happy to be speaking to you today, and I'm very happy to be sharing space with 2 people whom I have learned a lot from. That is Father Chetan, who was my student, but I've learned a lot from him with his enthusiasm and all of that. And also Sister Inigo, who's been a great inspiration to me. We worked together in Tihar jail in Delhi. Excellent religious person. So I'm really happy to be sharing something. Now, Father Chetan has given you an overview of the document. My specific topic is there, you see it on the right of your screen, called to restore order from global disorder. In other words, I'm going to speak about globalization, how each one of us is in a world which is seemingly ordered, but there's a lot of disorder, and each one of us is responsible both, I think, for the order as well as the disorder. Let us see how this thing will work out. Now we are living in a global village. Everybody is extremely happy because we feel that this village or this whole setup is very beautiful. You have this song, no, we are the world, we are the people, etc. And we try to live really in this global village. There is order. Very often we talk of one family, we talk of one people, one world, and one love. So this is the kind of order that we very often see. Think of this. The very fact that I'm speaking to you and you are in different parts of India, maybe some even abroad, shows that we're really living in a global village. So we're all connected through internet, through cyberspace. I could have breakfast, let's say, in the US, have my lunch in maybe London or Paris, and have my dinner in Agra or Delhi. With regard to food, So much of food. Formerly you could just eat the local food. Today you have pasta and pizza and hot dogs and sambar and Punjabi food and sushi, Japanese food and all of that. What about entertainment? You have so much of entertainment, so much of enjoyment in this so-called global village. So we're all together, very happy, we're all united. Not only that, we say that India is a poor country. Who says India is a poor country? India is a rich country. We have this guy called Ambani. He's got a house which is 27 floors. It's more costly than the Versailles, the palace at Versailles in France. So you see the amount of money that we have, and we have a lot of money, a lot of good time. But when we come to Fratelli Tutti, number 7, Pope says this: as I was writing this letter, the COVID-19 pandemic unexpectedly erupted. And then there were shattered dreams. This is a number 9. You know very well, friends, that our whole world came to a stop. We really didn't know what hit us. We had people going into ICU, being crucified on ventilators. We had people dying. You had priests, you had nuns, you had doctors, you had the poor, you had the rich. Nobody really was spared from this pandemic. And we still continue to feel the effects of this pandemic. It is not yet over, so to say. This is where we are, friends, at present. The COVID pandemic, this is where we're trying to move ahead. Now, the question I want to ask you is this: are we living in a global village where everybody is having the great time of his or her life? Or is this a global pillage? Now, pardon me, pillage means plundering. Are there certain predators? Are there certain guys in this village who are sucking others, who are living on others, so you don't have equality? Or do you have a world order? We often speak of India, India shining, India is one of the top countries now, India's got all the vaccines possible, etc. Or is it world disorder? That is the question. When we look at ourselves, when we look at our surroundings, when we look at our country, when we look at our world. So what exactly is the problem that we are dealing with? As I said, I'll be speaking on this globalism and globalization, which is a big part, I think, of this whole concept of being brothers and sisters. Fratelli, tutti, sorelle, tutte, we say in Italian, which is from Latin. If you take a count, these words appear 43 times in this document. They are referring basically to one world. So we say today there are no borders. This is a so-called free world. The word globalism, appears 1 time. Globalized appears 6 times. Globalization appears 11 times. And global appears 25 times. So totally 43 times in this document, which has 287 numbers. Now, number 12, whenever you see on your screen the number, it refers to Fratelli Tutti, the number which is over there. So number 12 says this: local conflicts and disregard for the common good are exploited by the global economy. Economy is very much part of this globalization, in order to impose a single cultural model which unifies the world but divides persons and nations. For as society becomes ever more globalized, it makes us neighbors but does not make us brothers and sisters. Okay, I feel very close maybe to somebody in the US because I'm connected to the person, or somebody in Hong Kong. But the question is he or she really my brother or my sister, which should evoke concern in me. Indeed, there are markets where individuals become mere consumers or bystanders. The advance of this kind of globalism strengthens the identity of the more powerful, who can protect themselves, but tends to diminish the identity of the weaker and poorer regions, making them more vulnerable and dependent. Political life becomes increasingly fragile in the face of transnational economic powers, what we call MNCs, multinational companies, that operate with the principle of divide and conquer. So they seem to be bringing people together, but actually their whole strategy is divide people and conquer. Now we come to this place where we're speaking of dark clouds over a closed world. This is the context or the situation. What is happening? One side we're speaking of the whole world as one, the big one. The other side, there's the possibility of one in many. So this is the kind of choice that we have to make. one world where there is uniformity, and we're speaking of one world. On the other side, university or unity in diversity. Second, a programmed world. Are we thinking of a programmed world, which often happens, or a world in process, a world in growth? Third, Pope Francis speaks of a throwaway world, which is negative, or do we want an open, embracing world where everyone is accepted? Then plan for one strong person, one strong government, one strong economic system, or planning for the weakest, where everybody is taken into consideration. Do we want a monarchy, as what happens, one government, or a theocracy? Religious nationalism is speaking of only one government or one religion as supreme compared to others. Or do we want a participative democracy where everyone is equal, one person, one vote? And finally, do we want to be governed by one religious book, whether it be the Gita, the Quran, or the Bible, or the Constitution, or humanism? We'll have to see what is the important thing for each one of us. Next. What is here at stake is the whole question of equality or equity. Very often we speak of equality and we say it's a great ideal. But the problem is this: when people are not equal, when there is a certain amount of discrimination at the start, we cannot really have equality. So what is important is equity. You see to the right of your screen, if there is somebody who is very short, for him or her to be able to look over the fence, you're required to put 3 blocks below. So the person who's the blonde over there, the right of your screen, is very short, and you have 3 blocks. The other one has 1, and the other one has a lower thing. It's like a 100-meter race. You have 3 people running. If somebody is lame, you put the person ahead to 50 meters maybe, and then there is parity, then there is equality. Next. So the thing here is that Pope Francis wants to have a world, a united world, but built on diversity, where everybody is respected. So he speaks of issues of, number 5, issues of human fraternity and social friendship have always been a concern of mine. That is what he says. And he says, I've sought to make this reflection an invitation to dialogue among all people of goodwill. That is across cultures, across religions. He made a comment which was very, very interesting. And it was this, he says the pluralism and diversity of religions are willed by God in his wisdom. That is, diversity is a fact of life given to us by God. This was when he signed that document along with the Imam over there in Abu Dhabi. Next. Now, the important thing to notice is that the Pope is learning from experiences and he's widening out the circles. So the first document which was there, Laudato Si, which came in 2015, there was dialogue there, and he introduced for the first time 3 numbers. That is, if you see Laudato Si number 7, 8, and 9 with Bartholomew, the Orthodox Patriarch. But this time, from Laudato Si to Fratelli, Tutti, he's been inspired by the Imam Ahmad al-Tayyib, the historic document when he was there in Abu Dhabi. That is February 2017. And you have in the numbers there 5, 29, 136, 192, and 285. In all these numbers, he mentions what he has learned together with the Imam. Next. Now, I will show you certain globalizations that destroy. We speak of unity, but these globalizations destroy. The first one is globalization and progress without a shared roadmap. And we don't have a common kind of agenda. It's going to be very, very destructive. And what on number 29, he says this: with the Grand Imam Ahmad al-Tayyib, do not ignore the positive advances made in the areas of science, technology, medicine, industry, etc. So he's saying we accept all these. But he says, which is marked there in blue, there exists a moral deterioration that influences international action and a weakening of spiritual values and responsibility. We can also point to the major political crises, situations of injustice, and the lack of equitable distribution of natural resources. Next. Another globalization that destroys. One model of globalization consciously aims at a one-dimensional uniformity and seeks to eliminate all differences and traditions in a superficial quest for unity. If a certain kind of globalization claims to make everyone uniform, to level everyone, that globalization destroys. So he calls this a false globalism. I'm just reading out what are the colored parts over there because I have other things to speak about. And then he speaks, the future is not monochrome. If we are courageous, we can contemplate it in all the variety and diversity of what each individual person has to offer. How much our human family needs to learn to live together in harmony and peace without all of us having to be the same. Next. One more he speaks of, it should be added that with increased globalization, what might appear as an immediate or practical solution for one part of the world initiates a chain of violent and often latent effects that end up harming the entire planet. So he says we're almost having a world war, but world war fought piecemeal because they're so united. So one conflict in one part of the world will affect another conflict in another part of the world. Next. What about nuclear weapons? Again, he speaks of a growing interdependence, and globalization mean that any response to the threat of nuclear weapons should be collective and concerted based on mutual trust. This trust can be built only through dialogue. I won't stress this point too much here because Father Chetan has already spoken about dialogue, but we have to be very careful because today we can destroy ourselves many times over through nuclear weapons. Next. Now let us go to globalization, which can be positive, some of the positive things which will help us. Pope Francis says this, the Holy Spirit transforms and renews us, creates harmony and unity, and gives us courage and joy for mission. Next. Now these globalizations which are promoting order, and we can look at some of them, he says that there's need for a global juridical, political, economic order for law, for politics, and for economics, which should be having a globalization, that means coming together to foster the welfare of the poorest of the poor. Let us go ahead. Next. Another one, he says, it should be kept in mind that an innate tension exists between globalization and localization. We need to pay attention to the global so as to avoid narrowness and banality, yet we also need to look to the local, which keeps our feet to the ground. So it's very important to have these three in harmony, the local, the national, and the global. I shouldn't be bothered about, starvation in Africa, and I keep on filling my plate in my family or in my community. So local is extremely important, but keeping one eye, so to say, on the national and on the global. Go ahead, please. Then a globalization of the most basic of human rights. It's very important that human rights, people are ensured of all their human rights. And therefore, he speaks of a globalization of the most basic of human rights. That is why the world politics needs to make the effective elimination of hunger one of his foremost and imperative goals. He says we don't even have food ensured to everybody. Then he speaks of love. Now, very important in this document, the Pope with a heart, and he wants each one of us to have this great heart. The word heart itself appears about 52 times in Fratelli, Tutti. You have these pictures which you've seen the Pope. Political charity. He speaks of a political love or a political charity born of social awareness, and social charity makes us love the common good. Go ahead. Now, this is important. We're speaking of the call. 280 says, we cannot forget Christ's desire that all may be one. This is from the Gospel of John. And hearing Christ's call, we recognize with sorrow that the process of globalization still lacks the prophetic, spiritual contribution of unity among Christians. This is what we require very, very much. First of all, as Christians, and then opening out to all the other circles. Service of humanity and humanness is important. What is very important, next one, is flesh. And I think it's very important before we read all the 8 chapters to read the first 8 points. What is the basic fact of Christianity? The word became flesh and dwelt amongst us. I've just marked out the number of times flesh appears right from Numbers 1 to 8, which is before the real document. Next. Now, this is important, friends. When you look at these pictures, what happens to you? We feel something at the gut level. Why? Because these people are our sisters and brothers in the sense that at the flesh level, at the basic human level, we are all one. We feel pleasure, we feel pain. And what is happening to all these people in the picture, what has happened to them affects each one of us. Next. Next. So the important thing when we're speaking of Christ's call, am I my brother's keeper? It's very important right in the book of Genesis. And then when he speaks of the Good Samaritan, he says, remember the 2 people who walked by the side. Without doing anything, they were religious, a priest and a Levite. Whereas the Samaritan, who's a kind of outsider, he's the one who picked up the wounded person on the road. And the last judgment, Matthew 25, 31 and following, You'll be asked, whatever you did to the least of my sisters and brothers, that you did unto me. So, if you saw somebody on the road, suppose it was your sister and brother, what would you do? First, you would see, right? Then you would judge. How did this particular thing happen? Then you look at what are the resources available. So perhaps a first aid or something, or you take your sister and brother to the hospital and then decide what line of action you'd want to do. So this judge is very, very important. I'd like to just say one thing here when we're talking of globalization. You'll be very careful because that what are so-called unholy trinities. You have religion, politics, and economics. Always the Banya, the first three of the caste system, and also with Christianity, all the other religions. Normally the politician or the king always finds favor with the religious person who is the head of whichever group, and the economist, the merchant. These three are always together. In India, unfortunately, the media now is joining in this, and you have an unholy trinity that exploits people very subtly, each one supporting the other. Next. Now, we should not be discouraged because the Trinity of God is with us. God is always with us. So despite the fact that we see a lot of disorder, a lot of sin and selfishness, let us remember that God is always with us, and this is something which is extremely important. So we have hope, and this is what the Pope is always speaking about, hope, despite what is happening in the world. Next. So basically, what the Pope is doing really is analyzing the various situations, and all these are extremely important in his analysis. I won't go into any details over here, but the 7 areas which are there, science and economics and politics and social structure and psychology, culture, religion, all these are extremely complex, so it requires certain amount of analysis of understanding the situations before we can respond. Go ahead, next. So these are the chapters there. This is Father Chetan has already spoken about that. The heart open to the world, from local to national to global, dialogue and friendship in society, paths of renewed encounter, and religions. So I think one person tomorrow, Shellland, is going to speak about religions, and somebody's going to speak about women, Sister Inigo, and then you would have Bishop, I think, speaking about migrants and refugees. So each group requires a kind of response, but all these are interrelated. Go ahead, next. The religions will be spoken of tomorrow. And the last year, the important thing is to realize that Christ is suffering today in the world. And the question that Father Chetan said, am I a neighbor to people? On the left, we have Father Stan Swami, who's been working with the poor there, and today he is imprisoned. On the right, you have a picture of Kandamal, where so many of our Christian sisters and brothers suffer. But this is not only something about Christianity, it is people all over the world who are suffering, and that is something that we will have to think about and we'll have to respond to. There's a prayer of the Holy Trinity, but this we can take at the end because my time is up. I won't take extra time so that there's time for sharing. And Sister Inigo also will share something. Thank you very much.